Hello, and welcome to the Plant Profile Podcast. My name is Austin Seibouts, and I'm excited to be talking about an ancient remedy that has been a part of human society since time immemorial. Today, we're talking about Yarrow, Achillea millefolium, otherwise known as soldier's woundwort and nosebleed plant, which I'm sure already, just based off of the name alone, you're kind of getting an image of some of its medicinal actions here. And also, it's known as thousand leaf, and that's because of the fact that Yarrow has compound leaves with all these multiple fractalizations of smaller leaflets coming off the side of it, giving it this feather-like appearance with an illusion of 1,000 leaves surrounding a flower stem. Yarrow is a plant that oftentimes marks the beginning of a plant path for herbalists, for healers, for really anybody who wants to get into the wonderful medicinal actions of various herbs. And Yarrow is a wildflower that stands out as a hero to not only individuals learning their plant path, but also, as we mentioned, this plant has been a part of human society for time immemorial. Yarrow pollen has actually been found in the grave sites of primitive Homo sapiens, dating back thousands and thousands of years, indicating that it wasn't only valued and revered as an ally for our well-being, but also had cultural, spiritual connections as well. For me, it was actually the very first plant that I ended up learning about when I moved here to Spokane, Washington. I was just starting to get into foraging, fairly deep into my herbal practice already, and so I'd heard about Yarrow, of course. When I went out hiking to go foraging for the first time here, I stepped out of the truck, stepped into the soil, and almost immediately found Yarrow. And it's not hard to find. Yarrow has a very, very distinctive plant. It's in the Asteraceae family, meaning that it's related to daisies and sunflowers, and just like other asters, it has these composite flowers, meaning each flower head, if you look closely, is made up of smaller flowers. If you don't believe me, go check out a sunflower, because this is very easy to see on the side of a sunflower. The leaf structure also indicates an unwrapping of fractals. They look like feathers. If you look closely, it looks almost like there's a bunch of smaller leaves coming off of the main structure. These are known as leaflets, and the particular arrangement of these leaves on Yarrow give it the name thousand leaf. It looks like a bunch of smaller leaves. It can grow around 1 to 2 feet tall, so it's not necessarily the tallest aster, but it is absolutely powerful. Its root structure also doesn't go down very deep. However, the root structure does spread through rhizomes. Now, Yarrow is one where if you find one in the forest, you're likely going to find another patch nearby. In fact, these patches can spread fairly far in the garden or in a wild setting. And so it makes Yarrow a very easy plant to propagate, which we'll dive into at the very end here. These rhizomes and root structure of Yarrow are also incredibly important in the way that Yarrow interacts with its ecosystem, helping to regulate and move nutrients around. Now, if you come across the cultivated varieties of Yarrow, you might see it in a pink to yellow coloration. In fact, there's a decent amount of Yarrow that grows on the coast of San Francisco that is just bright yellow, very, very vibrant, hard to miss. But in nature, Yarrow actually has a white to cream coloration. And there's a wide variety of different kinds of Yarrow. Achillea millefolium is the one we're focusing on today. It's the most common Yarrow, and it's found all around the world in temperate northern hemisphere regions. We also get some local varieties here in the United States, such as alpine yarrow, A. lanulosa, or boreal yarrow, A. borealis, which, as you can tell by the name there, tends to be a very cold, hardy yarrow. In fact, it can actually grow up into Alaska. But Achillea millefolium, you might think is an invasive plant because originally it was discovered and worked with in Europe, particularly in some of the Mediterranean regions. But yarrow actually naturally spread all throughout the world. It acts more as a naturalized plant for the most part. We'll dive more into that in a moment here. But it prefers to grow in mid to high elevations in meadows, grasslands, open forests, alpine hills, montane areas, these kind of open foresty alpine type of ecosystems, as well as disturbed or overgrazed soils. It generally prefers hot to dry conditions. Think again, Mediterranean climate here. Initially in spring, though, it does prefer a regular watering. It is drought tolerant and prefers for its soil to dry up in late spring into mid-fall. It also tolerates part shade, but it truly can thrive in full sun. It also thrives in an array of well-draining, generally acidic soil. As long as it's lean, meaning not too many nutrients in the soil, it doesn't like places that are overly fertilized, for instance. nothing too nutrient dense. Now, yarrow quite beautifully mirrors the actions it takes on the body in its ecosystem as well, breaking stagnation while also protecting its allies. So before we dive into its medicinal properties, let's first understand yarrow in its ecosystem to help us understand how it behaves in our body. Now, before we can continue, I have to, as always, mention that I'm not a doctor, I'm an herbalist, and any information that you gather here from the podcast should be further researched by you. Ask your doctor if you have any questions, and before you go and put anything into your body, whether it's coming from the earth or from a lab, know what you're getting yourself involved with there. Yarrow's extensive and fast-spreading root system make it an excellent minor plant, helping to break up mineral deposits as it's spreading. This is different than some of the other minor plants we've talked about on this podcast, where generally minor plants tend to have these long, deep tap roots that reach down into the soil to pull nutrients up. Yarrow is actually a plant that's root system is only generally right beneath the surface of the soil, about a foot down at most. And so what it ends up doing is, as we mentioned, breaking these deposits up and pulls a lot of those nutrients into its own roots. When it dies back later in fall and into winter, the nutrients that it pulls up are then redistributed on the surface layer of the soil. It also helps to build and strengthen the soil around it, building structure to it, partly due to the fact that it is a mycorrhizal symbiotic plant. So it has symbiosis with fungi and mycelium, creating this adhesive structure between its roots and the mycelium that build a mat to connect the structure of the soil and move nutrients around. So it helps with transportation of nutrients amongst itself and to other plants around it. Also, importantly, through that mycorrhizal network, yarrow is able to communicate with other plants nearby, encouraging them to produce stronger aromas. And that's important because those aromas oftentimes have an anti-pest quality to them. And in fact, the regulation of insects, partly through its aroma, but also through its appearance, is an incredibly important attribute to yarrow. In fact, I would say that that's one of the biggest game changers that it brings to an ecosystem. Yarrow is loved by pollinators, and that's because of the fact that it produces flowers all throughout the whole summer. And so we get varieties of bees, butterflies, beetles, and hoverflies that love to make yarrow a regular place to go and gather pollen. At the same time, however, yarrow also attracts beneficial predator insects that eat things like aphids. And on top of that, that strong camphorous aroma that yarrow produces, as well as the various other volatile oils from nearby plants that it encourages, have a repellent property on pests like aphids and mosquitoes. And so yarrow regulates and breaks up stagnation while protecting other organisms around it. It encourages movement of diversity of symbiotic organisms, transference of nutrients, and cleansing the air around it, while also dissuading parasitic or pathogenic beings. Now, if we're going to discuss the overarching interactions that yarrow has with its ecosystem, we would also have to mention that yarrow has been found to be mildly allelopathic, notably to seeds during germination, so it can inhibit the growth of new plants, essentially. Now, this is mostly apparent in the gardenscape, less so in wild ecosystems, but you do want to be careful, especially if you're trying to get some seeds to germinate near yarrow. You don't want to plant things like lettuce, carrots, or beans near yarrow. It has been shown to inhibit the growth of these plants during germination process. However, it doesn't seem to have the same interactions with established plants. And this is another indication for the general natural state of yarrow being protective of itself and its allies. The way I see this is that yarrow says, I'm growing here, do not grow in my bubble. And it behaves similarly on our skin and in our digestive system. So let's dive straight into that right now. Yarrow's most notable medicinal action is as an astringent styptic. Now, a styptic is a herbal action used on wounds to help with limiting bleeding. The way that yarrow does this is through astringency, meaning that it has these tannins in its biochemistry that help to bind with proteins and essentially build structure and tone to tissue, pulling it in and kind of tightening it up. Yarrow is, as we mentioned, known as soldier's woundwort, and that's because throughout millennia, yarrow has been worked with by warriors who have gotten wounded during battle. In fact, the name Achillea millefolium comes from the ancient Greek legend of Achillea, who supposedly, the reason he was practically invulnerable to attack was that he was dipped in yarrow at an early age. I work with yarrow when I'm out hiking in the field if I happen to get a cut along the way. In fact, recently when I was foraging, I was crossing a stream on this pile of logs, not realizing that one of those logs was hawthorn. Now, if you know hawthorn, these branches actually have these very serious thorns on the side of them, and I hadn't realized, but my wrist was right next to one. When I moved my wrist to go and, further continue down the log, humongous gash. Luckily, however, there was yarrow, which grows fairly abundantly around Spokane, just on the hillside ahead. So went and grabbed some yarrow, chewed it up to turn it into a poultice, and then stuck that right onto the fairly bad gash that was in my wrist, allowing that to set in. You can hold that there, or you can use a bandage on that kind of scenario, or in a more traditional extract, you can actually infuse oil with yarrow to make a balm. An excellent option to turn for, not only in helping to protect and build resiliency in our skin from gashes, but also for things like bee stings and splinters. A great option to help with pulling out those splinters by essentially, again, binding and tightening the tissue there with these tannins. Another excellent herbal preparation for yarrow would be hydrosols. You can use them as a spritz in addressing wounds. Yarrow not only helps to build protection, strength, and resilience to our outer world's surface layer, our skin, but also to our inner world's surface layer, our gut lining. So yarrow traditionally has also been worked with for things along the lines of leaky gut syndrome, a state of essentially loose tissue, also for ulceration and helping with the wound process, and on top of that, also is an excellent remedy for diarrhea. Most astringents can be worked with in diarrhea cases to help with clearing shit out, literally, but also helping with, again, building tone to the gut wall, so limiting fluid losses. Now, importantly here, yarrow is quite drying on the body, and so if you're going to work with it during a bout of diarrhea, you really should be, you already should be hydrating extra in that case, but extra so if you're going to work with yarrow. And in fact, if you're somebody who tends to lean on the dry side of things to begin with, you really should work with something more like plantain leaf if you want to use an astringent, and that's because plantain leaf is also moistening. However, I do find that yarrow tends to be a stronger astringent, so you could even combine the two of those if you want to bolster that property. Now, on top of it just simply helping in astringency, yarrow is also an antimicrobial. And so it can be used on the skin to limit infections, it can be used in the gut to limit infections, but most notably, yarrow is actually used to limit lower UTIs. Now, I note lower here because you do not want to work with herbal medicine as your response to an upper urinary infection, basically an infection that's reached the kidneys. The reason I say this is because of the fact that with upper infections, they actually become life-threatening. That said, however, most aromatic constituents that come from plants, volatile oils and resins and that kind of thing, are excreted through the urinary system. And so we can work with their antimicrobial property to limit or even kill off lower urinary infections. On the surface of our body, yarrow behaves as an element that creates boundaries, helps to protect us against things like pathogens, and it also helps to build and bind proteins to help us with resiliency to outside stressors. Internally, though, once we absorb yarrow into our bloodstream, it actually behaves very, very differently. Yarrow is a relaxant diaphoretic, which means that while it helps to limit blood loss on our surface, it actually aids our cardiovascular system by relaxing the capillaries, which can help blood to move more readily to the surface of our skin, which is oftentimes turned to promote sweating and release of tension, breaking a fever in particular. Beyond that, however, this relaxant diaphoretic property, this relaxation of the capillaries, can also mildly help to limit blood pressure by essentially, unkinking the hose. And so yarrow promotes movement of blood throughout the body, and oftentimes, apart from it simply being used for, again, fevers and achiness, this can help with things like varicose veins or hemorrhoids, especially in combination with its astringency there as well. Apart from being relaxing to our capillaries, yarrow is also relaxant to our nerves. It's a gentle, very, very gentle, nervine sedative. Yarrow isn't necessarily as powerful as a nervine as something along the lines of passionflower, skullcap, or valerian, but rather can be turned to during the middle of the day to help with frazzled nerves, with anxiety, with a general state of uneasiness during the middle of the day. It's also quite cooling in nature, making yarrow an excellent choice for nerves that are frayed specifically because of heat exhaustion. In other words, yarrow behaves as a nervine for those who want to relax themselves during the middle of the day without becoming drowsy, low energy, in a state of sleepiness. The roots also are particularly numbing. They act as a numbing agent. If you actually chew on the roots, your tongue will go numb fairly quickly. And traditionally, in medieval dentistry work, this was used during operations. You can actually extract these constituents into things like oil, though, to apply them to the body for things like joint pain, sore muscles, and again, wounds here. And when you tie that all together with its astringency plus its relaxant diaphoretic quality, it can really help to speed up and bolster the healing process in musculoskeleton-related wounds. Yarrow's volatile oils also help to limit stagnation within the respiratory system by thinning mucus and helping to lift it out of the mucous membranes and out of the body ultimately. It's not quite as powerful of an expectorant as something like arrowleaf balsam root or lomatium, which are these strong stimulant expectorants, but it does have mild qualities here that come together with it relaxing the bronchioles as a spasmolytic, so helping to open up our respiratory system and clear it out. And then those spasmolytic properties are also continued down into the digestive system as a carminative, meaning a spasmolytic that helps to relax the smooth muscles of our gut. And so it helps with promoting peristalsis, limiting bloating and gas. And on top of that, in the digestive system, yarrow also behaves as a bitter, meaning it's going to help with the release of bile, pancreatic enzymes, saliva, acids, basically our digestive juices, to help to break down and move food and waste products out of the body. Apart from also being an excellent remedy for helping with astringency and antibacterial quality on wounds, it also is a cooling remedy, so excellent as an option to turn for kind of hot conditions of the skin, rashes, burns, mosquito bites, itchy cat scratches, that kind of thing. Emotionally, yarrow helps us to build strength and boundaries while also easing us and relaxing us into the moment. An excellent remedy for anybody who's looking to strengthen their own inner world while not allowing themselves to be harmed by some of the everyday stressors around us. And so energetically, yarrow is both relaxant and toning, depending on whether you're talking about the surface or underneath the hood. Yarrow is also cooling, partly due to its diaphoretic qualities and bitter constituents. And it's quite a drying herb as well. It helps to promote the movement of fluids through the body. And so you might turn to yarrow in combination with something like marshmallow root or astragalus root to bring balance to some of those qualities. We've already named a number of good traditional uses for yarrow here, but just to kind of go over the list, yarrow is an excellent remedy to turn for in cases of fevers, colds, flus, bacterial infections. It's also great for clearing phlegm, so great to help with respiratory health during an infection. It also greatly reduces inflammation, especially of the capillaries and skin, while addressing cuts, scrapes, stings, bites, rashes as a nice remedy to help with astringency. It's also a cardiovascular tonic, helping to gently reduce blood pressure by relaxing the capillaries. Its varicose veins here can be benefited with the use of yarrow, partly due to its astringency, partly through the fact that it helps with blood flow. It's also great for reducing pain and physical exhaustion, as well as mildly thinning fluids throughout the body, including mucus and blood. It also is traditionally used to promote menstrual flow. Now, because of that, yarrow does have some contraindications here. You should avoid this completely during pregnancy, because it can act as an abortifacient. It also is advised to avoid it during breastfeeding, and those who are allergic to any daisies or other plants within the Asteraceae family should avoid yarrow altogether, or use it with caution, starting with a patch test to see how you interact with it. You should ask a doctor if you're planning on working with yarrow with children under the age of 12, but as I mentioned before, yarrow is actually an excellent remedy to introduce somebody into the powerful healing properties of plant medicine, because with kids included, yarrow can be used for things like cuts, scrapes, stings, splinters, that kind of thing, to show them just how wonderful of a remedy it truly can be. Now, I'm sure you can already guess that Yarrow has a rich array of biochemistry occurring within it that create these medicinal actions, namely things like volatile oils, sequesterpenes, flavonoids, tannins, coumarins, and even alkaloids, specifically the alkaloids being concentrated in the roots here, creating that numbing quality. Some of the volatile oils that are really noteworthy here would be, again, things like camphor, eucalyptal, thujone, and then also one that's found in chamomile, azulene. So azulene is found in both yarrow and in chamomile, and due to azulene, the essential oil of both of these plants comes out in a deep, inky blue coloration. This was one of my favorite oils to bottle when I used to work for a distillery because of this. It creates this beautiful coloration to it. And then those flavonoids are involved with its generalized anti-inflammatory properties. Tannins, of course, as we mentioned, are great for astringency. Coumarins contribute to its relaxant diaphoretic properties. And those alkaloids, specifically deposited in the root, cause the numbing and spasmolytic qualities of yarrow. Now, if you choose to work with yarrow in restoration projects or in your garden, first of all, thumbs up to you. Second of all, there's a couple of ways we can easily propagate yarrow. The easiest one, in my experience, is division. And essentially what you're going to do there is find a clump of yarrow, a patch, and divide a piece of that clump off, either to be moved to a completely different location or simply breaking off the roots from its main root system. So that way, this whole new plant can start its own rhizomatic offspring. I've done this successfully in various seasons. I haven't allowed myself to become too limited to when I do this, but I do find that the most effective time to separate yarrow is in early or mid-spring or mid to late fall, when its energy is essentially being transported to the roots rather than to the aerial parts of the plant. That said, again, I've had success with propagating yarrow through division right in the dead of summer before. So, easy way to propagate, and again, it's a plant that loves to spread anyway. Makes it easy there. And then the other way to do it, of course, would be through seed. Yarrow produces numerous seeds in late summer or early fall, and these seeds can be spread through the surface of its preferred soil types. Again, nothing too compost-rich or fertilized. It's a bit more of a lean soil that stays dry. The seeds are more likely to germinate if they are planted in fall and allowed to overwinter, though. So basically, they do need a little bit of a cold stratification. Now, for planting yarrow alongside other companions, you can turn to Balsamorrhiza sagittata. Arrowleaf balsam root gets along with yarrow very well. Chamomillum nobile, German chamomile, is another great option. Anything really within the lavandula genus as well. Most of our aromatic herbs do lovely with yarrow. Low aromatic plants, however, also can benefit from yarrow as they might be more pest susceptible. Things like squashes, tomatoes, strawberries, and camas can all be turned to in this case. And then other culinary herbs like basil become even stronger in their aroma and flavor for our own use in medicine and food. So something to consider there as well. I've actually planted mine next to wormwood in my garden, and they seem to get along quite nicely, particularly because many of the same bioconstituents are found from one to the next. And we'll go into a whole episode on wormwood, Artemisia absinthium, in the future. If you have any comments, questions, stories, or experiences with yarrow, I would love to hear them. You can reach me at theearthengrove@gmail.com, where you could also book me as an herbalist if that's something you're looking into. Or alternatively, you can go to the booking page on my website, which will be linked in the bio. Thank you so much for listening through on this podcast. I hope you have a wonderful time foraging or gardening yarrow. Take care, be well, and have a blessed rest of your day.